People want you to think that used games are almost as bad as piracy, or even outright theft, but I've never really understood this kind of logic. Since this is already a pretty well-discussed topic at this point, let's just get into some of the more popular arguments used against the existence of used games. Number 1. Developers don't see a penny of that money. I'm not really sure who first reanimated this argument and Frankensteined it to game development, but whoever did might just be an absolute genius, because this is the most shouted bullet point of all time. So, if you really believe this, and just let me ask you a question. Why aren't you swearing off the purchase of used cars? The manufacturers don't see any of that money either. Why aren't you staunchly opposed to renting or buying a house from a realty company? The construction firm doesn't receive further compensation for the enjoyment of their hard work, and neither does the designer. Ever rented a movie? Once that film is bought by Redbox or whoever, the producers don't receive a penny of your rental purchase. The truth is that we don't start defending companies in any other industry that apparently suffer from the same injustice. Entire businesses thrive on the sale of such things as used appliances. And no one is bitching that Craigslist doesn't force people to give a portion of their sale to the companies that created the goods they sell. And I think it's a bit revealing that no one even bitches about people selling their own used games on Craigslist. It's only a problem when GameStop does it. In fact, we've become so casually complacent on this issue that we'll happily go to the thrift store for their eclectic selections, paying $2 for name brands while we have more than enough money to pay full price. But even stepping into a store like GameStop is an ethically deplorable action. The real issue here, and the bottom line of why it's not a reasonable argument for any industry, is because the company already got 100% of the money that that company itself already agreed was fair. Here's the breakdown. If I pay for a game and that game has online multiplayer, then I have officially paid the company for their own asking price for the single slot on that server that we both agreed the game was worth. When I trade that game in, I am, by the act of getting rid of it, no longer taking up my slot on that server. Therefore, when someone else buys my used copy and jumps onto the multiplayer, they are using my slot that I am no longer occupying, a slot already set aside by the company for one player. A slot they have already filled for their own asking price. And if I buy a new game without multiplayer and sell it to a friend for a $5, then it's still only one person playing that one game that has already been purchased from the company. Number 2. If someone can just buy a game used, why would they ever buy new games? While I will concede that the alarming breadth of the used game market does influence some people's purchasing decisions away from new games, this argument omits a really crucial factor. The success of the used game market is entirely dependent on the success of new game sales. If no one buys a game new, there is simply no way for anyone to buy it used, and that's just true because of science. So let's say, for the sake of argument, no one buys the brand new game Hello Kitty's Curse of the Time Vampire. Since the game sold exactly 0 new copies, it has the maximum potential for exactly 0 used sales. Because used games don't just replicate themselves infinitely the way that piracy can, the existence of one used game on a shelf means that it must have been sold new at some point. But on an entirely different note, this kind of talk is just blatant fear-mongering, because the rise of used bookstores certainly led to no one buying a single new book since 1949, right? Yeah, alright, moving on. Number 3. Used game sales can take advantage of you, or the way that I like to call it, GameStop is evil. I actually tend to agree with the spirit of this one. GameStop is by no means a great company model, and they certainly are not some Robin Hood figure whose sole existence is to provide affordability to the customer. But honestly, if we were to stop buying things from companies just because of shady business practices, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because no one would ever buy a new game, or really pretty much anything else. And arguing that nobody should give their money to GameStop because it's the kind of company a more subtle and entrepreneurial Hitler would start in his free time is a little hard to stomach when you look at any of the business practices of companies like EA or Capcom or Activision. And it's true that used games are, in themselves, an exploitation of the free and open market system. But let's not pretend for 1 second that the game developers themselves aren't currently benefiting from that same system at this very minute. a system that is engineered to promote almost endless corporate rights with almost no corporate responsibilities. I mean, operating within this capitalist machine, EA has been able to buy up and subsequently destroy 11 companies in just 7 years, purchase exclusive rights to sports licenses and completely monopolize the market, and generally make multiple billions of dollars for its executives at the expense of the copyrights, jobs, livelihoods, and hard work of thousands of others. And what gamers and GameStop and numerous others do in comparison is simply a more consumer-focused version of the exploitation of this free and open system that EA has been face-fucking for years. Bitching about it now, only because their favorite system has a couple minuscule downsides, comes off as brainlessly deceptive. There's plenty of other arguments, like how things such as cars depreciate in value, however games provide the same experience verbatim every time, or that you have other options, like waiting for the price to drop, or there to be a bundle deal. But if I buy a car to get me to work, then getting to work around 3% more better doesn't really incentivize new over used, and just listing an arbitrary number of other options that might be better for one company or another company really just terminally avoids the discussion altogether. Honestly, I think it's time we treat game companies squirting pissiness all over every used game for exactly what it is. Vapid, useless, childish whining. It's like the construction company bitching about how they built a house, but now the realty company is making money from renting it to its customers and not paying them constantly and consistently for their hard work 10 fucking years ago. It's like a car company demanding money from me because they once built a car in '06 and I bought it used, whining incessantly about how I can't have the wheels for the car until I pay them $50 a month because fuck you, give me money! These things just don't happen in other industries because the people that belong to those industries have matured beyond 6 years old and no longer see their products as toys to be lorded over on the playground. It's actually interesting we even give these idiots a platform to preach on when they boldly talk into a mic owned by someone else, on a stage built by another company, in a building someone else pays for, only to cry tears about how every other person using their stuff after they already received money for it is just so not fair. Used games have more than just a right to exist. They are the only bit of control we, as consumers, have left in an industry with such shameless outright contempt for the very people they choose to make products for. As responsible consumers, we need to grow beyond just rushing to the defense of these companies at the first sign of any tears. Companies that put out press releases boldly announcing that if you didn't like the game, then you can feel free to ask for a refund, then not only outright denying that refund to anyone that asks, but banning their account for having the fucking gall to take the bait. We need to stop defending the companies that are so obsessed with their margins and so repulsed by their actual customers that they advertise and pawn off DLC not only before the game is out, but before a single screenshot has ever even been released. These companies that place review embargoes, preventing absolutely anyone from even talking about the quality of their game anywhere from a few hours to a few days after it's released, protecting the game's coveted shittiness that they are obviously so embarrassed of. This is not the behavior of companies that need your protection. These are companies that commit egregious acts of corporate and market fraud only to hide behind you at the first sign of having to take any kind of fucking responsibility. But hey, if you want to spend your time defending this kind of behavior, that's cool. You do you. But when we're all busting rocks in the off-world EA-sponsored Silicon mines, spending what little free time we have playing Battlefield 87, then I fully reserve the right to say I fucking told you so.